He paid to save them and married both of them in the end. He was a quiet man, the kind people rarely noticed unless they needed something fixed or a problem solved. He lived in a small rented house near the edge of the city, close enough to hear the noise of traffic but far enough to live in peace. His life followed a simple routine. He woke up early, prayed, went to work, came home tired, and slept without many dreams. He never complained about what he did not have. He believed that life gave everyone a role, and his role was to work honestly and stay away from trouble. He earned just enough to survive. Some months were harder than others, but he managed by being careful with money. He never wasted food, never spent on things he did not need, and rarely bought new clothes. People sometimes laughed at his simple lifestyle, but he did not mind. Deep inside, he believed that peace was worth more than comfort. One evening, while returning from work, he passed by a small house that looked older than the others. The paint was peeling, the gate was broken, and the lights inside were weak. He had passed that house many times before, but that day something was different. He heard quiet crying. It was not loud, not dramatic, but heavy with pain. He slowed his steps without realizing it. Inside that house lived two sisters and their sick mother. The father had passed away years ago after a long illness that took away everything they owned. Since then, the burden of survival had fallen on the two sisters. One worked during the day, the other took small jobs when she could, but it was never enough. Medical bills had piled up. Loans were taken. Promises were made. Deadlines were missed. The man did not know all of this yet. He only knew that something was wrong. A few days later, he met an old neighbor who mentioned the family in passing. The neighbor spoke about unpaid debts, pressure from lenders, and a mother whose health was getting worse. The words stayed in his mind long after the conversation ended. That night, he could not sleep properly. He turned from one side to the other, thinking about the house with the broken gate. He told himself it was not his problem. Everyone had struggles. He was not rich, not powerful, and not responsible for fixing other people's lives. Still, his heart felt heavy. Over the next week, he found himself taking the longer road home, just to pass by that house again. Sometimes he saw one of the sisters sitting outside, staring at the ground. Sometimes the lights were off even at night, likely to save electricity. Once, he saw a man standing near the gate, talking loudly and angrily. The sister stood quietly, her head lowered. The man left after a few minutes, clearly unhappy. That scene disturbed him deeply. He had grown up seeing similar situations. He knew how pressure could break people, how debt could turn life into a cage with no exit. He remembered his own childhood when his family had struggled, when his mother sold her jewelry to pay bills, when his father stayed silent even when life was unfair. Those memories made his chest feel tight. Still, helping was not easy. He did not have extra money. Everything he had was planned carefully. If he helped them, he would risk his own safety and future. He spent days arguing with himself in his head. One voice said, "Stay away. You can't save everyone." Another voice said, "If you don't help when you can, what kind of person are you?" His hand shook slightly as he raised it. For a moment he thought of turning back, but before he could, the door opened. One of the sisters stood there. She looked tired, older than her age. Her eyes showed fear mixed with politeness. She did not know why he was there. He introduced himself simply, saying he lived nearby and had heard about their situation. He spoke carefully, not wanting to insult them or make them uncomfortable. At first, she denied everything. She said they were fine, that there was no problem, but her voice trembled. After a few moments, the other sister came forward, and slowly the truth began to come out. They spoke about the loans, the illness, the pressure, and the fear that followed them every day. They did not cry loudly. Their pain came out quietly in broken sentences and long pauses. The man listened without interrupting. He did not judge. He did not offer advice right away. When they finished, there was silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy but honest. He left that house that night without making any promises. He said he needed time to think. The sisters watched him go, unsure whether he would ever return. That night he sat alone in his room and looked at his savings. It was money he had collected over years, meant for emergencies, maybe for a future family, maybe for a small home of his own one day. It was not a huge amount, but it was everything he had. He calculated their debt again and again in his mind. The number scared him. Paying it would leave him with almost nothing. He would have to start over from zero. He might even struggle to survive for some time. Fear filled his thoughts. What if something happened to him later? What if he needed that money? But another thought was louder. What if he did nothing? What would happen to them then? He remembered the look in their eyes, not asking for charity, only understanding. He realized something important that night. Money could be earned again, slowly, painfully if needed. But once lives were broken, it was not easy to fix them. Days passed. He avoided the house for a while, trying to escape the decision. But every time he saw someone struggling on the street, his heart reminded him of the sisters. Finally, one morning, he woke up with a strange, calm feeling. He knew what he had to do. He went to work, completed his duties, and then went straight to the bank. His hands shook as he signed the papers. With each signature, it felt like he was letting go of a part of his own security. When it was done, he held the receipt in his hand and stared at it for a long time. That evening, he returned to the small house with the broken gate. When the door opened, the sisters looked surprised. He did not waste time. He told them clearly and simply that he would pay the full amount of their debt. He said it was not a loan, and he did not expect anything in return. For a moment they thought they had misunderstood. When they realized he was serious, emotions overwhelmed them. One sister tried to refuse, saying it was too much. The other began to cry silently. They asked him why he would do such a thing for strangers. He answered honestly. He said he did not want to see lives destroyed when he had the ability to help, even if it cost him comfort. He said that sometimes doing the right thing did not make logical sense, but it felt necessary. That night marked the beginning of a change none of them could fully understand yet. For the sisters, it was the first night in months they slept without fear. For the man, it was the night he accepted uncertainty for the sake of humanity. He did not know where this path would lead him. He only knew that once a decision is made from the heart, it cannot be taken back. And so, quietly and without anyone noticing, a simple man stepped into a story far bigger than himself. After that night, life did not suddenly become easy. In some ways, it became heavier for the man, even though he felt lighter inside. Paying the debt solved one problem, but it opened many new challenges that no one could see from the outside. The next morning, he woke up before sunrise. For a few seconds, he forgot what he had done. Then reality came back to him like a slow wave. His savings were gone. His safety net no longer existed. He sat on the edge of his bed, breathing deeply, telling himself to stay calm. He reminded himself that he had made the choice with full awareness. There was no regret in his heart, only responsibility. At work, he focused harder than usual. Every task mattered now. He stayed longer hours, accepted extra duties, and never complained. Some coworkers noticed his tired face and asked if he was unwell. He smiled and said he was fine. He did not want sympathy or praise. What he had done was not for attention. Meanwhile, inside the small house with the broken gate, the atmosphere had changed. The sisters woke up that morning in silence, unsure whether the previous night had been real or a dream. For months, they had lived with constant fear. Every knock on the door felt like danger. Every phone call brought panic. Now, for the first time in a long while, there was no pressure waiting for them. Still, relief came mixed with guilt. They felt safe, but uncomfortable with the idea that someone else had paid such a high price for their peace. They talked quietly to each other, wondering how they could ever repay such kindness. Their mother, weak but aware, held their hands and thanked them for staying strong. She prayed silently for the man who had stepped in when no one else did. A few days later, the man returned to their house, not to discuss money, but to check on their well-being. He asked about their mother's health, their work, and their daily needs. His voice was calm and his behavior respectful. He did not act like someone who had power over them. He behaved like a neighbor who cared. The sisters noticed this immediately. He never reminded them of what he had done. He never used words that made them feel small. Instead, he encouraged them to stand on their own feet again. He helped them plan how to manage their expenses better. He suggested ways to improve their work situation, not by giving orders but by sharing ideas. As days passed, people in the neighborhood began to notice changes. The angry visits stopped. The house lights stayed on in the evenings. The sisters walked with less fear in their steps. Naturally, curiosity grew. Whispers began. Some people guessed that someone had helped them, but no one knew who. The man kept his distance publicly. He did not want rumors, but fate had its own plans. One afternoon, a shopkeeper casually mentioned his name while talking about the family. Someone else overheard. Slowly, the truth spread. When people found out, reactions were mixed. Some praised him quietly, calling him kind-hearted. Others questioned his intentions. A few even mocked him, saying he was foolish to sacrifice his future for people unrelated to him. He heard these words but chose silence. He had learned long ago that explaining yourself to everyone only drains the soul. The sisters, however, felt the weight of these whispers deeply. They worried that people would misunderstand the situation. They feared their honor would be questioned. They avoided unnecessary outings and focused on work and caring for their mother. Still, the man's presence gave them strength. He reminded them through his actions that dignity does not come from public approval but from inner honesty. Over time, a quiet bond formed between them. It was not rushed and it was not spoken aloud. It grew through shared conversations, mutual respect and trust. The man began visiting occasionally, usually bringing groceries or medicine. He always asked before coming and never stayed longer than necessary. The sisters noticed how he listened more than he spoke. When they talked about their fears or hopes, he did not interrupt. He did not judge. This made them feel safe in a way they had not felt before, even with close relatives. However, inside the man's heart, a struggle had begun. He tried to deny it at first, but emotions are not easily controlled. He admired the strength of both sisters in different ways. One was calm and thoughtful, the other more expressive and emotional. Their resilience touched him deeply. He respected them, and with respect came feelings he had never planned to have. This realization scared him. He questioned himself late at night. He asked whether these feelings made his earlier actions wrong. He worried that others might be right in doubting him. To protect everyone, he considered distancing himself completely. But life does not always allow escape. One evening, the sisters invited him to sit and talk. They sensed his unease. With honesty and courage, they spoke about their own confusion. They told him they did not see him as someone who helped for control or benefit. They saw him as someone who treated them as equals. That conversation changed everything. It cleared misunderstandings but also revealed deeper emotions. No promises were made. No future was discussed. But truth was spoken, and that alone brought relief. Outside, society continued to judge. Inside that small circle, something real was growing, slow, uncertain, but honest. The man knew that whatever came next would not be easy, but he also knew that pretending nothing existed would only lead to pain. By the end of this part of the journey, all three of them understood one thing clearly. The debt he paid had saved more than money. It had opened doors to emotions, challenges, and choices none of them had expected. The road ahead was unclear, but it was no longer empty. And so, quietly, without loud words or dramatic moments, their lives moved forward, bound not by obligation, but by trust that continued to deepen with every passing day. As time moved forward, the calm that had settled over their lives began to feel different. It was no longer just relief from trouble. It became a space where emotions had room to grow, quietly and without warning. None of them planned it this way, but real life rarely follows plans. The man tried to return to his old routine. He focused on work, took extra shifts, and kept himself busy so his mind would not wander. On the outside, he looked the same, quiet, respectful, and disciplined. But inside, his thoughts had changed. He found himself thinking about the sisters more often than he wanted to admit. He wondered if their mother's health was improving, if they were eating properly, if they were sleeping without worry. He reminded himself again and again that his help had no conditions. He had stepped in as a human being, not as someone expecting a place in their lives. Still, feelings do not disappear just because we tell them to. The more he tried to control his heart, the louder it became. The sisters were going through their own struggles. With the pressure gone, they finally had time to breathe and think. That space brought questions they had pushed away for months. They talked late at night, whispering so their mother would not hear. They spoke about gratitude, about dignity, and about the man who had stood by them when everyone else looked away. Both sisters felt something strong, but in different ways. One felt comfort in his steady presence, his calm voice, and his sense of responsibility. The other felt inspired by his courage and honesty, by the way he chose hardship for himself so others could stand again. Neither sister wanted to hurt the other, and that made their emotions even more confusing. They did not compete. They did not argue. Instead, they tried to understand themselves. They questioned whether their feelings were real or only born from gratitude. They feared judging themselves too harshly or too softly. Most of all, they feared that speaking the truth might destroy the fragile peace they had just found. Meanwhile, the mother noticed changes too. She saw the way her daughters smiled more often, how they spoke with hope instead of fear. She also noticed how the man behaved, always respectful, always careful with words and distance. As a mother who had seen much of life, she sensed that something deeper was happening, even if no one said it out loud. One afternoon, the man visited to check on the mother. She asked him to sit and talk alone. He hesitated, but he agreed. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were sharp. She thanked him again, not just for the money, but for restoring dignity to her home. Then she asked him a question that made his heart stop for a moment. She asked him what place he saw for himself in their lives. He did not answer quickly. He chose his words carefully. He said he never wanted to cross boundaries or create discomfort. He said his only intention had been to help, nothing more. The mother listened quietly, then smiled gently. She told him that good intentions do not always end where they begin. Sometimes they open doors we did not know existed. That conversation stayed with him for days. It forced him to face what he had been avoiding. He could no longer pretend his feelings were not real. At the same time, he understood the seriousness of the situation. Any wrong step could damage reputations, trust, and emotional balance. The sisters also reached a point where silence felt heavier than truth. One evening, they asked the man to sit with them and talk openly. There was no anger in their voices, only honesty. They spoke about their emotions, their confusion, and their fear of society's judgment. They made it clear that nothing had been forced and nothing was expected. The man listened, his heart beating fast. When it was his turn to speak, he admitted that he cared deeply for both of them, but that this reality frightened him. He did not want to cause pain or be the reason for conflict between sisters. He respected them too much for that. Tears were shed that night, not from sadness, but from the weight of truth finally being shared. There were no promises, no decisions, only understanding. They agreed to take time to involve family elders and to allow wisdom to guide emotion. Outside their home, life continued as usual. People went to work, laughed, argued, and judged. Rumors grew stronger as people noticed the man's continued presence. Some spoke kindly, others spoke harshly. The sisters felt the pressure again, but this time it was different. They were not alone. The man faced criticism too. Friends warned him to step away. Some said he was risking his respect. Others said he was creating unnecessary trouble. He listened, but he did not act out of fear. He knew that avoiding truth only creates deeper wounds. Slowly, discussions with elders began. These were not easy conversations. They were long, emotional, and often uncomfortable. Every concern was raised: social norms, future stability, emotional health. Nothing was ignored. The man answered every question honestly without hiding behind pride or excuses. The sisters also spoke for themselves. They made it clear that their voices mattered, that their choices were their own. This honesty surprised many people. Some softened their stance, others remained unsure. But the conversation had begun, and that itself was progress. By the end of this phase of their journey, nothing was decided, yet everything had changed. Silence had turned into dialogue. Fear had turned into cautious hope. The man understood that love, when it appears in unexpected forms, demands more responsibility than comfort. As they stepped into the next stage of their lives, all three knew one thing clearly: whatever happened next would require courage, patience, and truth. And this time, there would be no turning back. The calm that had begun to settle over their lives did not last long. As their small world slowly adjusted to new emotions and understanding, the outside world began to notice. The man who had quietly stepped into their lives to help could no longer remain invisible. People began to talk. Friends, neighbors, and distant relatives started noticing the frequent visits, the groceries being delivered, and the polite conversations that lasted longer than normal. Rumors began to spread like wildfire, each version more exaggerated than the last. Some said he had ulterior motives, others whispered that the sisters were being controlled. The small family, once hidden in their own struggle, suddenly became the center of attention. The sisters felt the pressure almost immediately. Walking down the street, they could hear whispers. At the market, people stared and made comments under their breath. Even old friends seemed unsure how to act around them. It was not malicious, mostly curiosity, but it felt heavy on their hearts. They felt vulnerable in ways they had not experienced before. Their home, once a place of quiet struggle, now carried the weight of public judgment. They stayed closer together, supporting each other in small ways, holding hands when they felt nervous, speaking softly in the evenings about the events of the day. The man felt it too. People he had worked with, neighbors who had barely spoken to him before, now made remarks that carried judgment. Some admired his generosity but hesitated to express it openly. Others questioned his intentions, wondering if he had helped the sisters simply to gain their affection. It was painful for him. He had acted from the heart, without expectation, and yet society was not willing to see the simplicity of truth. Each whispered accusation felt like a small cut, but he refused to respond with anger. Instead, he focused on protecting the sisters and maintaining his dignity, knowing that any rash action could create more problems than it solved. Family elders soon became involved. Aunts, uncles, and even distant cousins wanted to know what was happening. They had heard the rumors and felt it was their duty to intervene. The man welcomed their presence, knowing that transparency was necessary. Meetings were held, sometimes in the sisters' home, sometimes in the homes of relatives. Every concern was voiced: societal norms, potential misunderstandings, the reputations of everyone involved. The sisters spoke clearly, expressing that they understood the situation and that they had never felt forced. The man, with patience and respect, explained his intentions again. He emphasized that his actions had been entirely voluntary, guided by morality and compassion, not personal gain. These discussions were not easy. Voices were raised, eyebrows were furrowed, and tears were shed. Elders questioned the logic, worried about what society would think and whether the sisters' futures would be affected. The sisters expressed their gratitude, but insisted that their gratitude had never been a measure of obligation. The man, understanding the delicacy of the situation, assured everyone that every decision moving forward would be handled with care, dignity, and transparency. Slowly, the tension began to ease. People began to see that honesty had a power stronger than rumors or judgment. Despite the social challenges, life at home started to regain a sense of normalcy. The mother's health continued to improve with proper care. The sisters found new energy for their daily routines. Work became more manageable, as fear and stress no longer clouded their minds. Even though the outside world judged, within the walls of their home, trust and understanding deepened. The man continued his visits, always respectful, always careful not to overstep. Simple gestures, a helping hand with groceries, a quiet conversation, advice when asked, became the threads that held their fragile peace together. Emotions, however, could not be contained. The bond between the man and the sisters grew stronger, subtle but undeniable. Each interaction carried unspoken words. One sister admired his strength in silence. The other respected the quiet way he faced adversity. He, in turn, found himself drawn to both in ways that were difficult to explain. His heart had grown to care for them deeply, yet he feared missteps, knowing that society and family expectations could complicate everything. Each day became a careful dance of honesty, restraint, and awareness. One evening, after a long day filled with tension from neighbors and relatives, the man and the sisters sat together in the quiet of their home. For the first time, the discussion turned to feelings rather than circumstance. The sisters admitted their confusion, their fear of what society would think, and their admiration for him. He listened intently, acknowledging their words with care and thoughtfulness. He admitted his own feelings, explaining that they were real but complicated, and that he never wished to create discomfort or pain for anyone. This honest exchange, while not easy, brought relief. Truth had a way of freeing them, even when it carried uncertainty. During this time, the sisters began to support each other in understanding their emotions. They spoke openly about boundaries, respect, and the importance of mutual consent. They reminded themselves that admiration and gratitude were not the same as obligation. They took comfort in knowing that the man's intentions were genuine, rooted in kindness rather than desire for reward. It was a lesson in emotional intelligence that none of them had anticipated but which would guide their actions in the coming months. Society continued to observe, but slowly, perceptions began to shift. People who had whispered now watched with curiosity rather than judgment. Some began to see the integrity of the man, realizing that his actions were not transactional but motivated by moral conviction. Others remained skeptical, but even skepticism softened in the face of consistent honesty. The sisters, sensing this change, felt less burdened by public opinion and more confident in their decisions. Life, though complicated, became increasingly manageable. At the center of this slowly shifting world, the family realized the power of patience. Challenges were not removed, but resilience and understanding had grown. The man, the sisters, and their mother navigated each day with care, making choices that balanced emotion with reason. Each conversation with relatives, each public observation, and each private discussion became a lesson in humility, courage, and honesty. The small house with the broken gate, once a place of fear, had become a symbol of endurance, compassion, and growing trust. By the end of this period, a profound realization settled over them. True relationships, whether born from necessity, kindness, or emotion, require transparency, patience, and understanding. They had survived fear, judgment, and uncertainty and had emerged stronger. The road ahead would be filled with more challenges, but they were no longer alone. Together, they had built a foundation not based on obligation or societal expectation, but on honesty, respect, and emotional truth. And it was this foundation that would carry them into the next chapter of their lives. The days that followed were a mixture of calm and uncertainty. The man, the sisters, and their mother had faced scrutiny, judgment, and whispers from the outside world, but inside their home, understanding and trust had deepened. Yet life was about to move into a new phase, one that none of them had fully anticipated. The feelings that had been carefully restrained for months were now impossible to ignore, and the challenges of social acceptance loomed large. It began slowly. The sisters realized that they could no longer ignore the bond that had formed with the man. It was not only gratitude or respect. They felt genuine care, admiration, and affection. But this realization brought with it a complex mix of fear and hesitation. They knew society might never fully understand. They worried about judgment, about what friends and neighbors would say, and about the whispers that had already followed them. Most importantly, they feared disrupting the delicate balance that had allowed them to rebuild their lives. The man faced similar struggles. He cared deeply for both sisters, but he was acutely aware of the responsibility that came with those feelings. Every action needed thought. Every word had weight. He wanted to honor their trust, protect their dignity, and ensure that their choices remained their own. Nights were spent in quiet reflection, often staring at the ceiling, thinking of how life had led him here, from a simple, ordinary routine to a life filled with responsibility, emotion, and unexpected love. Slowly, with guidance from trusted family elders, the three began to navigate these feelings openly. Long conversations took place, carefully balancing honesty with sensitivity. Each person spoke about their emotions, fears, and expectations. The sisters expressed their admiration and affection, but they also made clear that they wanted respect, consent, and fairness at every step. The man, in turn, expressed his deep care, his fear of causing pain, and his commitment to acting responsibly. These conversations, though challenging, laid the groundwork for a decision that would honor all their lives. Society, as always, remained a concern. The outside world had a tendency to judge harshly and speak without understanding. Rumors continued to circulate, but the family had learned to act with patience and transparency. The man ensured that every step taken was communicated clearly to relatives and respected community members. He wanted to prevent misunderstanding, but he also wanted the sisters to feel empowered in every decision. Slowly, perception began to shift. People who had been suspicious started noticing the integrity in his actions, the consistency of his character, and the respect he showed toward the sisters. As decisions were discussed, the family explored every practical and emotional angle. They consulted elders about legalities, societal acceptance, and future security. They considered the sisters' independence, their emotional well-being, and the man's capacity to provide a stable, loving environment. Each discussion was detailed, patient, and honest. No one rushed and no one assumed. The focus was always on respect, dignity, and mutual consent. Through this process, the sisters' confidence grew, and the man felt a sense of peace he had not known since before he first stepped into their lives. Finally, after months of careful reflection, the decision became clear. With full consent, openness, and guidance from trusted elders, the man married both sisters. This was not a simple act or a casual choice. It was the result of deep thought, moral consideration, and a commitment to honesty. Each person involved understood the seriousness of the decision and embraced it with awareness and care. It was a choice born from compassion, trust, and emotional truth, not from obligation, convenience, or societal expectation. The marriages were not easy at first. They required adjustment, learning, and patience. The sisters learned how to navigate their lives together with someone they both cared for deeply. The man balanced his responsibilities, emotions, and the well-being of the family. Challenges arose, as they do in any family, but these challenges were met with discussion, understanding, and mutual support. Slowly, harmony grew. The sisters found joy not only in their lives but in the bond that had been carefully nurtured over time. The man found fulfillment in knowing that his actions, though unconventional, had created a home filled with love, honesty, and respect. Community acceptance came gradually. While some remained skeptical, others admired the courage and integrity displayed. They saw a man who had acted selflessly, a family that had maintained dignity, and a choice that was honest and consensual. Over time, whispers turned into acknowledgement and skepticism softened into respect. The family, once burdened by fear and judgment, now experienced quiet pride. They had built a life that honored truth, love, and responsibility in a way that few could fully understand but everyone could admire. As the months passed, Small moments became treasures. Shared meals, laughter during quiet evenings, support during illness, and small celebrations became the threads that held the family together. Life was not without its struggles, but it was filled with purpose and care. The sisters supported each other, their mother grew stronger with care, and the man provided stability and guidance without ever taking control. Together, they discovered that love could take many forms and that respect, honesty, and compassion were the true foundations of a family. Looking back, the journey seemed almost impossible to believe. A quiet man with limited resources had stepped in to help strangers in need. Through courage, moral clarity, and persistence, he had saved not only their lives but also their dignity. In the process, genuine love and connection had blossomed in ways that were unexpected, unconventional, but deeply human. The story of their lives became a testament to the power of honesty, selflessness, and respect, a reminder that true relationships are built on trust and understanding, not mere appearances or social expectation. In the end, the small house that had once been a place of fear and uncertainty became a home of warmth, care, and genuine affection. Each person in that home had grown, learned, and embraced the challenges that life had presented. They had faced judgment, emotional complexity, and societal pressure, yet they emerged stronger, united, and at peace. Their story was not a tale of fantasy, but a real-life example of how kindness, courage, and honesty can transform lives in ways that are both profound and lasting. And so, the man who had paid to save them and the sisters who had been rescued found a life together filled with love, respect, and understanding. Their journey, full of challenges and societal scrutiny, proved that real life does not always follow expected paths, but with patience, truth, and moral courage, it can lead to happiness, harmony, and a sense of fulfillment that is deeply real and truly human.